Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fourth and Goal podcast. I'm your host, Drew, and as you can see, no Rob today. He had some family things come up, so he's not going to be here this week. Hopefully, he'll be here next week or in a few weeks from now. If not, though, you will still have me doing these podcasts every week. But without further ado, let's get into the episode. We got a lot to cover, and we're going to start with news and notes. And the first thing to cover is Frank Reich being fired by the 1-10 Carolina Panthers. I mean, in all honesty, this doesn't surprise me that much. They're 1-10 after having the first overall pick, after trading away DJ Moore and this year's first overall pick to get that first overall pick. Plus, they traded away some other assets. This has been an absolutely brutal trade. I acknowledge Bryce Young maybe hasn't had the best weapons surrounding him, but this is something that you got to blame someone. The coach is always the first to fall. And Frank Reich, I like him as a coach. I think he's been a solid coach in the NFL. Not great, not terrible, but you need someone to blame when you have that much invested in the quarterback and you're 1-10 and that quarterback is looking like a massive bust, especially compared to a guy like CJ Stroud taking one pick after, who already looks like an elite quarterback in the NFL. The crazy thing, though, is that this is the second straight year he's been fired midseason. I don't think that's ever happened in the history of the NFL before, primarily because very few coaches get fired half a season into their new tenure with the team. And beyond that, there's not many coaches that get fired midseason either way because you can't really get anyone. It just shows you lost the locker room. They don't believe in you. Because you're not hiring the coach of your future midway through the season because you don't have the best options available. You're just putting in an interim and hoping that you can get the locker room back. You can show that you are willing to make changes. That's the only reason you do it at this point in time. So that says a lot about what ownership thinks of Frank Reich there in Carolina. But moving on further down the coaching carousel, we got to talk about the Chargers. And it's not because they've done anything. Brandon Staley is still there somehow. And I think every Chargers fan who would be watching, all at most one of you, because there's not many Chargers fans, I'm sorry, it's just true. But Chargers fans don't understand how Brandon Staley is still there, nor do I for that matter. He has been brutal there. The Chargers are, 4-7 now? Like a team that I honestly thought should have playoff aspirations, had the massive collapse in last year's playoffs, but still made it there at least. This year, even if they win out, I don't think they're guaranteed playoffs because 10-7 would be their best possible record. And winning out is not going to be an easy task for that team as they still have some tough matchups coming up. I believe they still have matchups with both the Broncos, who are much improved, as well as the Chiefs on the horizon. So that's going to be a pretty tough schedule to get to even 10-7, which is needed to be able to make the playoffs out of the AFC for sure. But the news in the Chargers organization is that Brandon Staley's not getting fired because he's a lame duck. They actually already have a deal in place to bring in his replacement, and his replacement would be Bill Belichick. A trade would go down between the Chargers and Patriots to bring Bill Belichick into the fold. Now, this is just rumors. I understand that. This is not actually news. This is not confirmed fact. This is nothing more than hearsay. But it makes a lot of sense. There was a lot of news that the Chargers were in on Sean Payton this past year, but they decided to keep Brandon Staley. They didn't want to pay the draft capital, and they see how that's paid off. This offseason, I could very much so see them saying, we screwed up last offseason, not getting rid of Staley, not bringing in Sean Payton, who at the start of the season didn't look great with the Broncos, but now the Broncos are in great position to be a playoff team and are one of the hottest teams in the NFL under Payton, who has really turned this team around. So they got to hope that they can get something similar out of Bill Belichick, a proven coach who's kind of fallen out of favor in New England thanks to recent draft history. The nice thing with the Chargers, at least, though, the Chargers do have a really good team to build around. They're just missing the coaching aspect at the end of the day. Because when you look at that team, pass rush, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa. Secondary, Derwin James and Asante Samuel Jr. Quarterback, Justin Herbert. Running back, well, we'll see what it's going to be. I don't know if Eckler's going to be back. But either way, wide receivers, you have a first-round pick in Quentin Johnson. I mean, let's see how he does. But also Mike Williams will be back, and Keenan Allen, who's been one of the best players in the league. Offensive line, you have Rashawn Slater at left tackle. Like, they have pieces to build around. And a really good coach can do something to make this team a playoff team like they were last year and like they should be this year. So it'd be really interesting. But I do think this is probably just hearsay. I love the concept. I love the idea, but it's probably just rumors, and it's unlikely to happen, especially because the Patriots are probably going to try to squeeze a lot of draft capital out of the Chargers, who I don't know if they want to give away much more than, a third to take a flyer on a coach that's kind of falling out of favor with an organization. In terms of the injury front, we have a few injuries. Not as many as normal, though, so this is always nice when we have less injuries than normal. We do have Jonathan Taylor, who's having surgery on his thumb. He's going to be out multiple weeks. That, I would like to say that hurts the Colts, but I don't really think it does. We've seen what the Colts offense looks like without Jonathan Taylor already this season, and it's just a healthy dose of Zach Moss, who has looked great when he's played instead of Jonathan Taylor. So I don't know if this is that big a loss for the Colts, and another reason why running backs aren't getting paid. The bigger injury news in terms of how it impacts teams is the Saints, who have Chris Olave in concussion protocol and Rashid Shaheed potentially out, along with Michael Thomas already out. So they might be missing all three of their top wide receivers against the Detroit Lions, my Detroit Lions, and I might be a Lions homer, but I can tell you right now, there is a way to beat the Lions, and it's by passing the football. Their run defense is stout. Their pass is mediocre at best. But if you're missing all three of your top wide receivers, I mean, the tight ends, I guess you got Taysom Hill and Jawan Johnson, but that ain't great. And Alvin Kamara out of the backfield. But again, the running backs are not where you beat the Lions. The Saints are going to be in tough, especially now that they are out of a playoff spot after their loss to the Falcons. They need some wins. The Lions also need to get things right again, because losing to the Packers on Thursday night, followed by barely beating the Bears on a massive comeback, this team is not looking that hot right now. I think this will be a get-right game for the Lions, but if they're not able to get right against this beat-up Saints team, ooh, it's going to be trouble in Detroit, I'll tell you that much. But that's it for the news and notes. Not as much happened this week as in past weeks, which is good and bad to different degrees. But moving on to our Week 12 recap, and we got to start with the 3 Thanksgiving Day games and the Black Friday Day game. And all I got to say is, meh. Like, the only game that was somewhat close was the Lions-Packers. And even that one, it took the Lions scoring and failing to recover the onside kick to get it to being a one-score game. Now, that one felt like the Lions were in it for most of the game, as opposed to the other games, which seemed out of reach from the beginning. But this has kind of been a problem with the NFL this year. The scheduling has been really bad. Like, I get it. You had a lot of injuries. These cause issues. Like, you thought the Jets were going to be a good team. And if Aaron Rodgers was there and the Jets were competent at the quarterback position, Jets-Dolphins might have been really good. If Geno Smith was still gunslinging like he was earlier in the season, Seahawks and 49ers could have been really good. Again, the Lions-Packers wasn't terrible, but then I don't know when they ever thought the Commanders-Cowboys was going to be a good game. Maybe they thought the Cowboys would choke like they sometimes do. I don't know, but this has not been the greatest scheduling, and it kind of went forward to the Sunday Nighter and the Monday Nighter. On the Sunday Nighter, we had the Chargers and Ravens, where the Ravens won 20-10 in a mediocre at best game. And on the Monday Nighter, one of the worst football games I've ever seen, with the Bears beating the Vikings 12-10 in an absolute puke fest that really no team deserved to have a win coming out of. But this is what happens. We were spoiled last week. The week before, we had a great Monday Night Football and a great Sunday Night Football, and I got optimistic, but kind of fell off the wagon in this week. We haven't had many primetime games. I think it's like 70 or 75% of primetime games have hit the under. This is a problem. I don't know what the solution is. I'm not an expert here, but I have to imagine behind closed doors the NFL is having these discussions, because this is revenue that they're losing. There's a lot of people tuning out of these primetime games early on, and this is where your moneymakers are. And yeah, they have long-term TV deals, especially with Amazon with that $10 billion deal. But at the end of the day, if they don't turn this ship around, those next contracts might not be as lucrative as the NFL would like them to be. Moving on from that, we got to talk about another NFL problem. I know I'm Mr. Negative today, but there are some problems that the NFL is having that we got to discuss, and that's the reffing. The reffing just seems to constantly come up, and nothing is more obvious of reffing discrepancies than the Bills versus Eagles game. The Eagles, yes, they had a great comeback. They won in OT. Super exciting game. I'll say nothing against that, but the refs were the 12th, 13th, and maybe even 14th men for the Eagles in that game. I'll acknowledge, in overtime and towards the end of the fourth quarter, the reffing seemed to be fairly reasonable, fairly fair. But for the majority of that game, when the Eagles were down, the refs were doing everything they could to keep the Eagles in that game. It was absurd. There was one play in particular that sticks out to me as one of the worst calls I've ever seen in the history of the NFL. Bills are driving. They're in the red zone. They're about to score. And what happens? Josh Allen gets horse-collared. While he's getting horse-collared, he throws the ball away, few feet away from Gabe Davis, and there's a flag thrown. What's the flag for in the end after the refs all come together? It's for intentional grounding. There's no flag for the horse collar. That happened right in front of the ref. You can watch the replay. The ref is literally staring at this tackle as it happens. He's like 5 feet away. Josh Allen throws it right near the feet of Gabe Davis, who it hits the ground like once, and he immediately recovers it. A eligible receiver recovers it immediately, thinking it might have been a fumble, and they somehow call intentional grounding as the only penalty. This pushes the Bills back, makes so they can't get it. The field goal ends up being blocked. This was literally a 7-point swing in a game that went to overtime. Absolutely atrocious reffing. One of the worst calls I've ever seen. It sticks out, but that was going on all game. There was a point in time where I think the Bills had 10 penalties to 1 against the Eagles, and I'll tell you right now, it was not because the Bills were playing dirty or making a lot of mistakes. A lot of these were really bad calls and really bad no calls, all going in the Eagles' favor, keeping them in that game. But I've bagged on the refs enough. I do try to give refs credit when they do. Anyone who watches my streams knows that I give refs credit when they make good calls. The sad thing is it doesn't happen very often, but it is what it is. Next thing I want to go into the Week 12 recap is the worst game of them all, the Giants and Patriots. And I just got to ask, are the Patriots the worst team in the NFL? I understand the Panthers are 1-10, but I don't feel the Panthers are as bad as the Patriots. Like, you lose 10-7 to the Tommy DeVito-led New York Giants. Like, the Patriots have lost some absolutely atrocious games this season. Like, there's no part of this team that is competent, it seems like. At the very least, with the Panthers, you can look at certain positions like Brian Burns and be like, okay, that's a really good player. You can look at their running game and say, hey, Chuba Hubbard's been all right. And Miles Sanders is coming back from injury and looking a little bit better. There's bits and pieces to say there's promise. You don't have that same feeling with these New England Patriots. It's bad. They could be in line for the number 1 pick because, again, one win by the Panthers and it could be over. And the final kind of negative thing we'll get into for the most part is the Pastronaut magic ran out. On Monday Night Football, we had the Pastronaut. I was excited. I thought he was going to go off again. And he threw like 4 picks. Now, I acknowledge not every one of these picks was his fault. There was one that bounced right off Jordan Addison's hands, but he just didn't look himself. He wasn't getting anything going. I don't know if I believe this stat because it just seems too wild to be true. But I heard a stat that only 4 receptions were made past the line of scrimmage that game. That seems crazy. But there were a shit ton of screenplays in that game. And I will say, for all of that happening, I'm very saddened because I went against TJ Hawkinson in fantasy. And that touchdown, that only touchdown of the game being to TJ Hawkinson, was the reason I lost in fantasy. Heartbreaking. And I'm out of my fantasy league at that point. I needed to win out. But moving on to the good. The Steelers put up 400 yards. And I'm so sad for all of you that Uncle Bob can't be here to show how happy he is. Because he was trumpeting that to the world. I did try to temper his expectations, saying that the Steelers still only put up 16 points. But you can never tell a Steelers fan. They're all convinced now that Kenny Pickett is the GOAT. Matt Canada was the failure. I mean, let's see if they can continue this. 16 points is still not enough points to win most games. But at the end of the day, guys, the Steelers have some pretty easy matchups coming up. I think the Steelers are going to make the playoffs. I don't know how. I think they're going to be far and away the worst team in the playoffs. But I think they're going to make it just because they got home games against teams like the Cardinals and the Patriots on the horizon. Some really bad teams going to Pittsburgh. Even though it's Pittsburgh, I don't know how they lose those games. So they might be a playoff team. And God damn it, Mike Tomlin does it again. I know that Dan Campbell's probably going to win Coach of the Year, and I like it because I bet on him. But fuck, how do you not give this to Mike Tomlin at the end of the day sometimes? Jesus Christ. And then the final thing in our Week 12 recap will be DaRon Bland with his 5th pick six. What? We are 11 games into this season, and DaRon Bland already has 5 pick sixes. That is an NFL record, and we're only about 2/3 of the way through the season. He could still very easily get another 1, 2, even 3 to pad to that. He's on pace to have literally a pick six every other game. This is absurd. Like, do we got to start talking about him for Defensive Player of the Year? I know Myles Garrett's the favorite. I know we got guys like TJ Watt and Micah Parsons who are leading. But, like, at what point in time do we start saying DaRon Bland should be depoy? Like, I understand there's more to it than just pick sixes. But, like, this guy has literally broken a record for pick sixes already. Like, if he keeps this up, if he has some good other stats, like, don't we got to talk about it? Like, if a guy went out and broke the sacks record, he would be hands down getting Defensive Player of the Year. Why not this record getting it too? It's just something to think about. But guys, with that, that's it for our Week 12 recap. Again, a lot of negative, and I'm sorry about that, but some of these things we just gotta talk about. And we can't ignore it. And hopefully next week we're going to be talking more about what we were in past weeks, like the pass not going off, amazing Sunday night, Monday night football games. That's what I hope to be talking about because that's way more exciting for all of us. But guys, moving on here, let's get up our picks for this coming week as we look into Week 13 right here. There we go. So we have 6 buys this week. I'm going to call this Fantasy Buy-mageddon. This late in the season, most of you only have 2 more weeks left until playoffs. Some of you, if you're in a league like me, have 3 more weeks because we only have 4 of 12 teams make the playoffs. But still, this is absolutely absurd how many teams are on bye this late in the season. And it's tough. You have 2 weeks left. You are searching for wins. Many of you trying to make the playoffs, trying to get those first-round buys. And you might be absolutely screwed by these bye weeks. And we came out of no bye weeks last week. How could we not have had 2 teams on bye last week and make this still work? I don't know. I don't get it, but that's how the schedule makers did it. Again, NFL, internal schedule makers, you got to figure this shit out because this is not being good this season. I don't know if it's because it's the first season I'm really paying attention, but it's been bad. And I've been hearing a lot more about it from podcasts I personally listen to, talking about how this season has been really bad for the schedule makers. They got to figure this stuff out. But either way, we do have 13 matchups to talk about. And let's start on the Thursday Night Football matchup. So anyone who's been watching Thursday Night Football knows that Thursday Night Football has been all but atrocious this season. Even 2 weeks ago, when we looked to have an absolute banger, we had the Joe Burrow at the time led Bengals and the Ravens, and we had Joe Burrow get injured, Mark Andrews get injured, Lamar Jackson almost looked to get injured, and we had an absolute stinker of a game that looked to be one of the best games of the year. Super sad to watch. I did not appreciate it, nor did anyone else, and obviously losing Joe Burrow and Mark Andrews for the season hurts any NFL fan. No matter who you are, unless, maybe you're a Steelers fan, in which case you were probably jumping for joy, a la Uncle Bob. But this week, I have some hope, some legitimate hope. We have the Seahawks versus Cowboys. These are both teams currently in wild card position. Both these teams played on Thursday last week, meaning it's not a really short week for them. They've had a full week to prepare for this game, something that often isn't the case for these Thursday night football matchups. So I'm optimistic that we can get some good football here. Again, the Seahawks haven't been playing their best football of late, and the Cowboys have been. But we all know when you start to think of the Cowboys as competitive, that's when they go and put up busts. And who knows, maybe the Seahawks and Geno Smith can come back alive, and we can have a really good Thursday night football matchup. I am optimistic. I do still have the Cowboys winning primarily because it's at home. But again, this is a trap game for the Cowboys. This is one of those games, as I say, when we start thinking of the Cowboys as a good team, is always when they put up massive ducks. Remember, they lost to the Cardinals this season, the 2-win Cardinals. This is a team that can lose to anyone, so don't be surprised to watch them fall to the Seahawks here. It's definitely in the realm of possibility. Other key matchups, the big one this week, obviously, is the 49ers at Eagles. I was actually shocked that the 49ers are favored in this matchup, even on the road to the Eagles. It shows that the odds makers kind of seen that, well, the Eagles have a really good record. They're, I believe, 10-1 at this point. It's not an awe-inspiring 10-1. The Bills are 6-6, and we've been talking ad nauseum about how the Bills haven't been that great in the NFL community, and they should have beat the Eagles. We've had the Eagles barely beat the Commanders a few times, lose to the Jets led by Zach Wilson, some atrocious games from the Eagles, barely beat by inches the Cowboys. They've been having a lot of close matchups. Let's see what they're able to do here against the what they're able to do here against the 49ers, because that's going to be a big-time matchup. Other interesting games going on, I think the Browns and Rams, honestly, I think that could be a really interesting game. Neither of these teams are that great looking right now, but the Browns need to get some wins. I do have them winning this game, but I go against Vegas on that one. And then Broncos-Texans. That's the sneaky game of the week. That is 100% the sneaky game of the week. The Broncos are on a massive winning streak and looking to solidify a playoff spot. And the Texans, taking a loss, they're on the outside looking in on the playoffs. They're actually behind the Broncos. Texans are favored, but I like the Broncos. Again, I trust this winning streak. This team looks to be playing really, really well. Let's see if they can keep it up. I think we got to remember that CJ Stroud's stats are overperforming his actual play pretty consistently. I know it's tough to hear that. I know a lot of people aren't going to like that. I know there might be hate in the comments about this. I get it. But CJ Stroud has thrown a lot more bad balls than his picks indicate. And if that even starts to turn a slight bit against this Broncos team, who has a much improved defense, this could be a game that they give up and they lose by a possession or so to the Broncos. And that's what I expect to happen. I expect the Broncos win streak to keep going. This team looks like one of the best teams in football lately, and it's crazy to say that. But that's it for most of the big matchups. Obviously, you can see here who some of my picks are. I am taking a number of upsets this week. I kind of have to. I'm trying to catch back up to Vegas, who is now 4 games ahead of me. I tried to do that last week and got burned a little bit, losing to Vegas by 2 games. So we got to try to make the comeback. The gambler's fallacy, but at the end of the day, my goal is to beat Vegas. I'm still within striking distance. I got to take some upsets, so that's where I got games like the Browns winning. I got the Titans winning, and I got the Broncos winning. Those are some of my upsets. I didn't go too crazy with them, but those are 3 that I think are fairly likely to happen, in my honest opinion. But with that, guys, let's move on to our final segment, Best Bets, I guess, without Bookie Bob this week. So a quick recap. Last week, I just made a simple bet. I made a Thursday night triple game parlay, all 3 games, and with the Lions losing, I did not get it. It is what it is. That was only $5. And this week, because we're doing it a bit later, we were able to get the weekly specials, and I didn't love the weekly specials with the exception of one. And it's an absurd one, let me tell you. It's Keenan Allen to get 11 receptions at plus 450. Now, let me be clear. Is it likely Keenan Allen is going to get 11 receptions? No. They're playing the Patriots. They should be able to beat up. But if we know anything about the Chargers, it's that the Chargers play to the level of their opponent. By which I mean the Chargers aren't going to be able to beat anyone up. They're not going to be able to get too far ahead of the Patriots, in my opinion, which means they are going to have to keep passing the ball. And in 2 of the last 3 weeks, Keenan Allen has hit 11 receptions. He's done it 3 times this season already. So this is not what I like against the balance of probabilities. It's unlikely to happen. But at plus 450, I'm going to take the chance because Keenan Allen is literally the only player working on that offense. And Justin Herbert knows it, and he's just throwing the ball to Keenan Allen constantly. He has literally saved my fantasy season because my wide receiver core has been so bad. And I am so thankful to him, even though I did lose and probably am out of fantasy. But yeah, that's my bet. I put $5 on it this week. Again, as always, any future bets that we decide to make will be placed on our Twitter. You can go find that at 4th and Goal 101. Also, you can go find our other videos at 4th and Goal 101 on YouTube here, TikTok, and Instagram, as well as watch our live streams on Twitch for Thursday Night Football, as well as Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football every week, all season long. You don't want to miss that. But with that, guys, I will leave you to it. Have a great day, and I hope to see you at some of our live streams. And if not, we'll talk to you again next week. Later.